All right, so the devil is in the details, right? So we're starting to learn more about, like, hey, what went wrong between Carson Wentz and the Philadelphia Eagles, right? What possibly could have led to the Eagles not only dumping him and trading him for what appears to be a third and likely a first, right? Barring injury, a third and a first, but also taking on the biggest dead cap hit in the history of the National Football League. What possibly could have been that? Then a report comes out and says that apparently Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson hadn't spoken for months. For months. The Eagles will take a $33.8 million dead cap hit. That's the largest dead cap hit any team has ever taken on any player. The Colts will assume the balance of the $128 million extension, including a $10 million guaranteed roster bonus due March 19th. So basically, we'll take on the tax, and you'll take on the salary and the player, right? Now, keep in mind that the Colts, they might or might not have T.Y. Hilton. He's an unrestricted free agent. They do have Jonathan Taylor. They do have a really talented young wide receiving core. And this is the second kind of trade of this, not just of this magnitude in terms of a quarterback being sent, but there's a similarity there, right? Not only does Carson Wentz go to play for a guy in Frank Reich who he played for in Philadelphia as his quarterback coach, but the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Sirianni, was in Indy, and so maybe that helps the discussion. I think what's interesting is hiring Sirianni didn't change Wentz's mind on wanting to move or their mind on wanting to move Wentz. And on some level, I do kind of respect it from Howie Roseman. Look, neither of these two guys can get along. It's not working. You're both gone. We move on from both of you. But I really like it from the Colts. Again, we do this thing where we'll say, okay, well, you're the Indianapolis Colts and you're a quarterback away. We talked about it all year long and we felt like they were just a quarterback away. So they're a quarterback away and you have Phillip Rivers, and what do you do? What could you possibly do? I understand that in your mind, you're like, well, they could draft a Pat Mahomes type. They could draft a Trevor Lawrence. They could do, but this is my big thing with the trade. What are those things called? The trade machines that you have, or with fantasy discussions about things. Like, I deal with reality. That's what I deal with. And in the reality of the NFL, the Indianapolis Colts did about as well in their search for a franchise quarterback as you can possibly do, considering where they are in the draft and what they need. Right? Like last year, when the Green Bay Packers drafted Jordan Love, one of the points that I made was like, look, they're not going to be able to select a high draft pick quarterback because as long as you have Aaron Rodgers, you're going to be good. And if you're going to be good, you're drafting in the 20s, you're going to miss out on the quarterbacks. And by the way, if you want to trade up, you have to trade so much draft capital, you can't support the rest of your team with draft picks, which is what you have to do when you're highly leveraged on one position like a superstar quarterback. You need those draft picks to support your team, the other 40, 52. So the Packers made the right decision, not because the right decision for everybody, but specifically for the Packers. They had a 37-year-old quarterback. They're going to need one probably in 2 or 3 years. And whether it's Jordan Love or not Jordan Love, that's their best shot at a guy who, at his best, is a top 10 prospect. And last year was probably an early second-round pick. They moved up because they thought somebody else was going to take him. And he has the upside of a guy drafted much earlier. But he wouldn't be available there if he was refined. Well, the same goes for the Colts. Like, is Carson Wentz the perfect quarterback? The answer is quite obviously no. He was a mess last year. Now, he had a bad offensive line. He's had massive injuries to the wide receivers. The franchise itself had drafted the wrong wide receiver in both the previous 2 years. They hadn't done a good job drafting their first and second round picks over the past 2 years, and that came to roost, right? But for the Indianapolis Colts, again, the context is everything. Is everything. If they could have gotten Trevor Lawrence, would Trevor Lawrence be a better option than Carson Wentz? Yeah. But guess what? They can't get Trevor Lawrence. You know? I mean, go around. What quarterback who's available do you like better? And while you could say, hey, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can get Tua. Right? You can't get Deshaun Watson, one, because it would cost too much to get him. His salary would be too high. And, oh, yeah, by the way, it's in your division. There's no chance the Colts, who might not even trade him, are trading him in division unless you're going to give so much. I mean, the last thing they want is to lose to Deshaun Watson twice a year every year. Right? So, again, let's deal with reality. You know, well, they could have had Tom Brady. No, they couldn't. Tom Brady's not going to play for Peyton Manning's team. No chance a year ago. Right? When you're the Indianapolis Colts and you have Frank Reich, you hire Frank Reich not just because of who he is, but because of his relationships. And last year's relationship garnered you Phillip Rivers. This year's relationship is going to get you Carson Wentz, a guy you'd have no chance of on the free agent market or even on the trade market if you didn't have Frank Reich. And so while there's definitely some negatives to it, he was a mess. He's going to have to rework a bunch of things. He's going to have to start over in terms of his leadership style. Whatever he was doing wasn't working. But he has sweat equity with Frank Reich. He has positive experiences with Frank Reich. And Frank Reich actually probably believes in him. And when you have that, when you have a rabbi in the room, when you have people who legitimately believe in you and they've seen you perform at your best, that's all you can ever hope for. It gives you a legit opportunity to win football games, which is why you're doing what you're doing, right? So do I like it? No, I don't like it for the Colts. I love it. I think it's an unbelievable get. Now, Wentz put his heels down and said it's the only place I'm going to go. So they didn't pay really through the nose for it. And if it becomes a first-round draft pick because he plays 70% of the snaps, then it's probably going to be a lower first-round draft pick anyway. You're not missing out on anything. And you keep this year's first-round pick, which will probably land you a left tackle, which is the biggest need outside of wide receiver that they need upcoming. Context is everything. You know, context is everything. It's like in the free agent market when LeBron's out there. Well, you didn't get LeBron. You couldn't have gotten LeBron. He was going to the Lakers regardless. You know, tell me a quarterback who's available that you could have gotten that was better if you're the Indianapolis Colts. And you could say, hey, well, what about these rookie? But who can they trade up and get? And outside of Trevor Lawrence, are you really sold that those guys are going to lead you deep into the playoffs, potentially to a Super Bowl? And while you have caution about Carson Wentz based upon how he played last year, that's reasonable. It's very, very reasonable. It is not an unreasonable take to say, hey, he sucked last year. What leads me to think that he'll be any good this year? I guess the only thing you can think of is he's played well with Frank Reich. It's a better offensive line. They have a better running game. They'll have better wide receivers. He'd be playing indoors, and he has an entire offseason to rework his entire game, rework his entire mental, and they can take some pressure off him because they have a really good defense. It's just a better, and more than anything, even if it's not perfect, it's the best possible scenario for the Colts. That's what's really important. Dream scenarios work in sports radio. They work, in your blogs. But in the real world of the NFL, the Colts couldn't have done any better. Couldn't have done any better. Now, look, I pointed out that the Colts and the Bears actually have the same record of the last 3 years. Same record. And the only difference is the Colts, if the Bears don't double doink a field goal, they have the same playoff record as well. So some of it is the perspective of, oh, well, it's the Colts, and had the Colts landed anybody you like Chris Ballard? Like, no, I know what the Colts are up against. I know how hard it is to get a free agent quarterback. There is no perfect guy that's out there, from Mariota to Jameis Winston to whomever. There is no, otherwise they wouldn't, if they're really that good, they're not available. Considering who's available and his connection with Frank Reich, you couldn't have done any better. Any better. And as predicted, the Philadelphia Eagles took pennies on the dollar because they overlisted their asset. They thought it would go for far too much.